I love this stuff. All the airplanes I've flown, this and the F4 are my two favorite airplanes. And Alaskan. I learned to fly an Alaskan. So, first experience with a Twin Beech is when I was a little kid. My dad was chief engineer at Grimes Manufacturing, and they had 931, 32, and 33 George Mike. And when I was a little kid, I used to sit in the right seat of those with, my dad or the chief pilot at Grimes, who was my hero and taught me how to fly, and wishing I was in the left seat. And when I found my way back to Ohio after working in Miami, Corrosion Corner, being a freight dog down there, I went to work for a company that owned all three of those Twin Beeches. So then I ended up sitting in the left seat sometimes, wishing I was somewhere else. And then flew those Beech 18s there, and through that and being involved with Grimes, just a love affair with a great airplane. And everybody's had these, and the story is not so much about the seat belts, but it's about the kind of flying you're doing, where one night we were on demand, so the phone would ring at about 5:30, and off you go. But sometimes we do the same flights, because when an assembly line would go down at General Motors, in this case in Oshawa, they'd be paying all those guys to sit there. And so if they needed parts, you'd hustle and get those parts up there to get the line going. So we had a flight, we'd go from Madison County, Ohio, which is near Columbus, to Knoxville, pick up the seatbelt buckles, a couple thousand pounds, go up to Buffalo and clear customs at Pryor Aviation, and then over to Oshawa and back. And usually you'd get somewhere and they'd say, oh, the freight's ready, and it wouldn't be ready. Well, that night, it not only was ready, but it had been sitting there in the rain for a couple hours. So these boxes of buckles. So we put the boxes on the airplane, we strapped them down, and did all the things we're supposed to do. And I had a flight instructor in the right seat trying to build time that didn't mind being out all night. And so off we go down the runway, and about a third of the way down or so, a bunch of those boxes just break loose, and all those seatbelt buckles go to the back of the airplane. So now you're like this, and we got airborne, and it's like, well, what are you going to do? So we go to Buffalo. We get up to Buffalo, and it's snowing a little bit and stuff, and a little bit of ice, not a big deal. And we land, and we go over to Pryor and clear customs, and as we're walking out, the guy looks at me. I mean, we were both kids, but I guess he was maybe even younger than me, and looks at me and he goes, well, what are we going to do? And I go, what do you mean what are we going to do? We're going to knock the ice off the airplane and go to Oshawa. That's what we're getting paid to do. So, a lot of dumb things that you would do, but you got paid to get stuff there. You didn't get paid to not get it there. And so anyway, we tried to adjust it, and we'll get some of the buckles up in front and do this and do that. And we got to Oshawa, and of course anybody that's flown Buffalo and Oshawa in the winter knows that you're doing that routinely. We were just talking about this the other day, and me personally, you didn't worry so much about how much you weighed, your single engine performance. You didn't care about that. You wanted that gas, so I don't know what you weighed. This airplane's a 10-1 gross, and we were probably there and then some, a lot. But
yeah. What was the most interesting cargo that you remember hauling, probably?
I know I'll walk away and think of something else, but we used to have there was a company in Springfield, Ohio that made these big pumps for oil rigs. And so every once in a while, we'd haul one of these things down to Galveston. And I remember one night, I was getting checked out. My brother Bob checked me out, and the two of us are flying down to Galveston with this big pump, and we didn't have a radar. So we're down about 4,000 feet, and it's nighttime, and we're trying to look around and everything. There were a few places that got kind of bumpy, and we had this 1,500-pound pump strapped to the back of the airplane. So we had this one updraft and downdraft, and that thing in the back goes, well, bam, like that. We're going like, easy, but that was kind of interesting. It was a long, usually we didn't go that far. And then I saw a cot in the airplane, that night we spent the night in the airplane on the ramp down at Galveston while the storms hit the fields and the airplanes jumping around. So that was a memorable thing. Yeah. Plus flying with my brother, it was pretty cool. So.
You go to Vietnam?
No, I'm not quite that old.
No, I was gonna say you're not that.
But I flew the D model F4 with a lot of guys that had, and it was a great way to learn.
Nice.
Yeah, single pilot IFR is not something I do now, you know, and the only thing about the airplane, it had that specialness to me because of growing up. But then once I started doing it for a living, you know, every night, or not every night, but many nights, it became, it's such a stable, solid, good airplane. And
we will be, we flew his memorial.
When you're out there doing that, and you don't have an autopilot, you don't have other guy, and you trim this thing up, and it just sits there, and it's really, it's a great. I think it gets a bad rap.
That was the awesome,
you know, knock on wood, I never had a ground incident with the airplane, but it's like my dad told me once with a lot of tail draggers. He always says, they'll always go where you point them, but you can't stop pointing them. You know, you don't sit there and start going down the runway with a crosswind and start doing something else. You know, you keep it on, and it'll respond and do what it's supposed to. You know, I just thought it's just an honest airplane, and the R985. It's just, now that it's a historic, you know, it was just great to fly that. And that's a great engine. That's one of the best engines I think ever built.
And it's kind of like you sort of are taking your place in this aviation circle of history in learning to fly kind of with these guys, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and now, I mean, I'm not one of those get off my lawn type people, but kids now, guys coming up now, they go to, not all of them, but they go to a simulator, you know, and that's kind of the only way they can do it. And then they look at their flight instructor and it's just a stepping stone. As soon as you get that, then you move on, and it's really a shame, because I instructed, when I had people riding with me, being a flight instructor, that's where you really learn how to fly. And I don't know if you know, in the airline business, you always talk about crew resource management, CRM, you know, and when you're a flight instructor, every hour, every new student it's a laboratory in CRM, because you're taking a student, you know, where they are and taking them somewhere, and they're all different, and they're all different levels, and you kind of learn that with this kind of flying, as far as you're hauling something a little different every night, you're going something different, you're flying in different weather, and it just gives you a, you know, a good baseline. And of course, the other side of the coin is, when I was doing it, I didn't have any choice because I needed a job, you know, and we were all looking for jet jobs at the time. You know, that's the other thing about the R985. Is in the 70s, everybody says, well, you get a jet job, you get a jet job, and then you go, well, you can't get a jet job unless you have some jet time, right? So you've been flying this thing with oil coolers and manifold heat and taking care of a radial engine, and you're using alcohol slingers and de-ice, and you're doing that all by yourself. Imagine my surprise, the first jet I ever flew in the Air Force, the T-37. I said, you mean that's all there is? Push to up, you know, to go, and pull back to stop, and that's almost, it's just that simple. You know, and it's like, so, I mean, managing a radial engine is, you know, you have to pay attention to temperature. It's not impossible, it's just something you learn how to do. It's not like you're not any better than anybody else, it's just you learn how, and you learn from people, and you know, I was very fortunate to have my brother check me out, because he'd come up there, because he'd flown some of the rattiest Twin Beeches. I mean, he's got great stories about the cargo door flying along with him, you know, and it came open, and blowing a jug, and you know, just a lot of different things, because he was down in Atlanta flying for some operator down there, I don't remember who.